I never thought I'd end up being the center of attention in my neighborhood, let alone become the subject of gossip or drama. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It all started on a warm Saturday afternoon, one of those days where the sun feels like it's baking the earth and the air is thick with humidity. My husband, Mark, had taken our daughter to her soccer practice, leaving me with some rare, blissful alone time. Our backyard has always been my little sanctuary. We don't have anything fancy, just an above-ground pool surrounded by potted plants and a couple of chairs that have seen better days. Still, it's mine. On that particular day, I decided to make the most of the quiet. I slipped into my favorite swimsuit, a simple black bikini with white polka dots, and eased myself into the cool water. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt relaxed. The world outside faded away, and for a few minutes, everything was perfect. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against pavement. At first, I ignored it, thinking maybe someone was just walking their dog or heading to their car. But the noise stopped abruptly, and I realized it was coming from near the fence that separates our yard from the neighbors. Curious, I turned my head slightly and saw her standing there. Karen. You know the type, perfectly styled blonde hair, oversized sunglasses perched on top of her head, and an expression that could freeze boiling water. She stood with her arms crossed, glaring at me as though I'd committed some unforgivable sin. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and dripping with disapproval. "Is this really appropriate?" I blinked, caught off guard. Appropriate? What did she mean? Was she talking about my swimsuit? My pool? The fact that I was enjoying my own backyard? I floated closer to the edge of the pool, trying to process what was happening. "I'm sorry," I replied, treading water cautiously. "What do you mean?" She gestured vaguely toward me, her perfectly manicured nails catching the sunlight. "You're in a bathing suit. In public view." Public view. I glanced around, confused. Our pool is tucked away in the far corner of the yard, completely enclosed by a 6-foot wooden privacy fence, unless Karen was standing on her tiptoes and craning her neck over the fence, which, judging by her posture, she absolutely was. There was no way anyone could see me. "This is private property," I said slowly, trying to keep my tone calm despite the irritation bubbling inside me. "I'm allowed to wear whatever I want here." Her lips pressed together in a tight line, and she adjusted her sunglasses, clearly unimpressed. Be that as it may, it's inappropriate behavior for the neighborhood. People have children, you know. Children? Really? Because as far as I knew, kids weren't spending their Saturdays peeking over fences into random backyards. And even if they were, why would my swimsuit be such a big deal? I stared at her, dumbfounded, unsure whether to laugh or cry. This couldn't be real life. It felt like something straight out of a bad sitcom. Before I could respond, Karen turned on her heel and walked off, muttering something under her breath. I watched her go, half expecting her to storm back and demand I cover up or leave the pool immediately. When she didn't, I tried to shake it off and return to my peaceful afternoon. But deep down, I had a nagging feeling this wasn't the end. Something told me Karen wasn't the kind of person to let things go quietly. And I was right. The uneasy feeling lingered long after Karen disappeared from view. I tried to push it aside, convincing myself that maybe she was just having a bad day or being overly dramatic. After all, what harm could come from someone seeing me in my swimsuit while I relaxed in my own backyard? It wasn't like I was doing anything wrong. But as much as I told myself to shrug it off, the seed of doubt had already been planted. What if she complained to the HOA? What if this turned into something bigger than it needed to be? I stayed in the pool for a little while longer, but the peace I'd felt earlier was gone. Every rustle of leaves or distant sound made me glance toward the fence, half expecting Karen to reappear with reinforcements. Eventually, I climbed out of the water, dried off, and went inside. Mark and our daughter wouldn't be home for another hour, so I decided to distract myself by folding laundry and scrolling through my phone. Still, Karen's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, inappropriate behavior for the neighborhood. Asterisk. About 20 minutes later, the quiet afternoon exploded into chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. My heart sank as I realized they were coming closer, closer to my house. Before I could even process what was happening, 2 police officers appeared at my gate. One of them knocked firmly, his uniform crisp and official-looking, while the other scanned the area with a wary expression. "Hi," the first officer said when I opened the door, trying to keep his tone neutral. "We received a call about a disturbance. Can we speak with you for a moment?" A disturbance? My brain scrambled to make sense of the situation. Sure," I stammered, pulling my robe tighter around me. "What kind of disturbance?" The officer hesitated, glancing at his partner before continuing. "A neighbor reported seeing someone engaging in indecent exposure." Indecent exposure. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, speechless for a moment, before managing to choke out a response. "Are you serious right now? I'm in my own backyard." The female officer stepped forward, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Mind if we take a look around?" she asked, not unkindly but with an air of authority that left no room for argument. Numbly, I nodded and led them through the house to the backyard. They surveyed the scene, the locked gate, the tall wooden fence, the obvious lack of any spectators, and exchanged skeptical glances. Clearly, this wasn't what they'd expected to find. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened?" the male officer asked gently, his tone softening. Taking a deep breath, I recounted everything. I told them about Karen's unsolicited comments, her accusations, and how ridiculous the whole situation seemed. By the time I finished, both officers looked more amused than anything else. "Well," the male officer said finally, "it doesn't seem like there's much here. Just try to avoid giving your neighbors a reason to complain, okay?" His words were meant to be reassuring, but they only added to my frustration. Avoid giving my neighbors a reason to complain. How exactly was I supposed to do that when Karen had already decided I was the problem? As the officers left, I stood in my yard, staring at the fence where Karen had stood earlier. Her actions felt petty, almost laughable, but they also carried a weight I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about a swimsuit or a pool. It was about control. She wanted to dictate how I lived my life, even in spaces that belonged solely to me. And worse, she'd succeeded in dragging law enforcement into it, wasting their time and mine. Word spread quickly after that. Within hours, it felt like the entire neighborhood knew about the incident. Some people gave me sympathetic smiles, clearly understanding how absurd the situation was. Others shot me disapproving looks, as though I'd single-handedly ruined Blue Ridge Lane's pristine reputation. I couldn't help but wonder how many of them secretly agreed with Karen, silently judging me for daring to exist outside the invisible boundaries they'd created. Karen didn't stop there, though. Apparently, involving the police wasn't enough for her. A few days later, a formal complaint arrived in my mailbox, courtesy of the HOA. It accused me of conduct unbecoming of a resident and demanded I attend an emergency meeting to address the issue. Reading those words made my blood boil. Conduct unbecoming. For wearing a swimsuit in my own backyard. It was ludicrous. And yet, it was happening. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Karen's complaints weren't just about swimwear or decorum. They were rooted in something deeper, something personal. Because here's the thing she conveniently left out. I'm disabled. On days when my chronic pain flares up, walking even short distances feels like climbing a mountain. That's why I chose a swimsuit. It's easier to put on when every movement sends shooting pains through my body. And yet, none of that mattered to her. All she saw was someone different, someone vulnerable, and she pounced. By the time Mark got home, I was fuming. He listened quietly as I vented, his jaw tightening with each word. When I finished, he shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered. "They're treating you like a criminal because you wore a swimsuit." I didn't have an answer for him. All I knew was that I couldn't let this slide, not without a fight. The HOA meeting loomed over me like a storm cloud, dark and unavoidable. I knew I couldn't ignore it, but the thought of facing Karen, and whoever else had decided to side with her, made my stomach churn. For days, I wrestled with how to handle the situation. Should I apologize and try to smooth things over? Or should I stand my ground and call out the absurdity of their complaints? In the end, I chose the latter. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about setting a precedent. If I backed down, what would stop them from targeting someone else next? When the day of the meeting arrived, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident, a crisp blouse and tailored pants. I wanted to look put together, professional, like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. Mark offered to come with me for moral support, but I declined. As much as I appreciated his solidarity, I needed to do this on my own. Besides, I didn't want to give anyone ammunition to accuse me of bringing backup or trying to intimidate them. Walking into the community center felt surreal. The room was already filled with neighbors, most of whom avoided eye contact, as I took a seat near the front. Mrs. Pembroke, the HOA president, sat at the head of the table, her perfectly coiffed hair and polished demeanor making her look more like a TV host than a neighborhood mediator. She greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for joining us, Sarah," she said, gesturing for me to sit. Her tone was polite, but there was an undercurrent of disapproval that set my teeth on edge. "We'd like to discuss the recent concerns raised about your conduct." I raised an eyebrow, biting back at a sarcastic retort. Concerns? Was that what we were calling it now? Instead, I leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze head-on. "You mean Karen tattling on me for wearing a swimsuit?" The room erupted into murmurs. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged knowing glances. Someone whispered, "Oh no, she's calling them out." Good, I thought. Let them squirm. For the next 10 minutes, I laid everything out. I explained how Karen had accused me of indecency, despite the fact that I was in my own backyard, completely hidden from public view. I recounted the unnecessary involvement of law enforcement and how humiliating it had been to have police officers show up at my door. Then I addressed the elephant in the room, Karen's ableism. "I'm disabled," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "On days when my pain is bad, even simple tasks like getting dressed can be exhausting. That's why I wore a swimsuit. It's easier to manage than a one-piece." And yet, none of that mattered to Karen. All she saw was someone different, someone vulnerable, and she used that against me. The room fell silent. Even Mrs. Pembroke looked rattled, though she quickly masked her discomfort with a practiced smile. "Sarah, I understand your frustration," she began, her tone conciliatory. "But we need to maintain certain standards in the neighborhood. Perhaps if you'd communicated with Karen beforehand." "Communicated?" I interrupted, incredulous. "About what?" "My choice of clothing. My medical condition. This isn't about communication. It's about control. Karen doesn't get to dictate how I live my life, especially not in spaces that belong to me." My words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. No one spoke for a long moment, the tension palpable. Finally, one of the board members cleared his throat and suggested taking a short break. As people filed out of the room, I stayed seated, my hands trembling slightly. I knew I'd struck a nerve, but I also knew the battle wasn't over. Predictably, not everyone appreciated my candor. After the meeting resumed, several neighbors voiced their opinions, accusing me of being divisive and disrespectful. One woman even claimed I was making things political when all they wanted was a nice place to live. Their comments stung, but they didn't surprise me. What did surprise me, however, was the handful of residents who approached me afterward to offer quiet support. An elderly woman named Margaret pulled me aside as I gathered my things to leave. "I've been where you are," she admitted softly. "Last summer, Karen complained because I was gardening in shorts, said it was unbecoming." She shook her head, her expression bitter. "I didn't say anything then, but I wish I had." "You're doing the right thing by standing up to her." Her words buoyed me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Still, the backlash came swiftly and harshly. Over the next few weeks, I found anonymous notes taped to my front door, each one nastier than the last. "Go back to where you came from," one read. Another simply said, "We don't want your kind here." Trash appeared scattered across my lawn overnight, and my car tires were mysteriously slashed. Each act of retaliation dug deeper into my resolve, but also into my anxiety. Mark begged me to let it go, to focus on our family instead of fighting a losing battle. But I couldn't. Every insult, every act of vandalism, only reinforced why I needed to keep pushing back. This wasn't just about swimsuits or backyard pools. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to exist without fear of judgment or harassment. The backlash was relentless, like a storm that refused to pass. Every morning, I woke up dreading what new form of harassment awaited me. Sometimes it was small things, notes taped to my door with vague threats or judgmental comments about how I was ruining the neighborhood. Other times, it was bigger, more deliberate acts meant to intimidate me. One morning, I stepped outside to find my car tires slashed. Another day, someone had scattered trash all over my lawn, leaving empty soda cans and fast food wrappers strewn across the grass like confetti. Each incident felt like another weight pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself these were just the actions of a few bitter people who didn't represent the entire community. But as the days turned into weeks, the constant hostility began to wear me down. It wasn't just the vandalism. It was the looks I got when I walked my dog, the whispers behind my back at the grocery store, the way some neighbors crossed the street to avoid passing me. Even in my own home, I couldn't escape the tension. Every knock on the door made my heart race, wondering if it was another complaint or worse. Mark did his best to support me, but even he started showing cracks under the pressure. Late one night, after finding yet another nasty note wedged under our windshield wiper, he snapped. "Why are you letting this consume you?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "You're fighting a losing battle, Sarah. These people aren't going to change. Why can't we just move on?" His words stung because deep down, I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. The HOA wasn't going to magically transform overnight, and Karen certainly wasn't going to apologize for her role in all of this. But moving on felt impossible. How could I walk away without standing up for myself, without proving that their behavior was wrong? If I gave up now, it would feel like they'd won, and worse, it might encourage them to target someone else next. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started documenting everything: the notes, the vandalism, the whispered insults. I snapped photos of the damage to my property and saved screenshots of any online comments directed at me. Then, I reached out to a local reporter whose work I admired. She agreed to meet me for coffee, and over an hour-long conversation, I poured out my story: the ableism, the discrimination, the absurdity of being accused of indecency for wearing a swimsuit in my own backyard. By the time we finished, she promised to look into it further. A few days later, the article went live. Titled *AHOA Drama Turns Ugly. Disabled Resident Targeted Over Swimsuit Incident. It laid bare the hypocrisy and cruelty of what had happened. The piece included quotes from me, photos of the vandalism, and even anonymous accounts from other residents who admitted feeling pressured by Karen's policing. Within hours, the story blew up online. Social media lit up with outrage. Hashtags like #StandWithSarah and #StopHOABullying trending locally. People from across the country chimed in, sharing their own experiences with toxic HOAs and entitled neighbors. The reaction in Blue Ridge Lane was immediate and chaotic. Some residents rallied around me, finally speaking out against Karen's behavior. Others doubled down, accusing me of seeking attention or making a mountain out of a molehill. Karen herself became eerily quiet, avoiding eye contact whenever we crossed paths. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. But the real turning point came during the next HOA meeting. This time, the room was packed, not just with neighbors, but also with reporters and curious onlookers eager to see how the drama would unfold. When Mrs. Pembroke called the meeting to order, her usual poise was noticeably shaken. She stumbled through a prepared statement condemning recent events and promising to review the HOA's policies to ensure fairness for everyone. It was vague and carefully worded, but it was something. Then, one of the newer board members stood up. A young father named Tom. He cleared his throat nervously before addressing the crowd. "I think we need to admit that we've handled this situation poorly," he said, his voice firm despite his obvious discomfort. "Sarah didn't do anything wrong, and treating her like a criminal is unacceptable. We should be ashamed." His words sparked a heated debate, with some defending the status quo and others agreeing that change was long overdue. In the end, the board voted unanimously to issue a public apology, not just to me, but to anyone who'd ever felt marginalized by their rules. They also announced plans to create a committee focused on inclusivity and accessibility within the neighborhood. Karen resigned shortly after, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew better. Rumor has it she put her house on the market not long afterward. As for me, I learned something invaluable. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, but it's always worth it. Today, I swim in my pool whenever I want, and if anyone has a problem with it, they can take it up with the internet warriors who rallied behind me. Life isn't perfect, but sometimes justice tastes sweeter than revenge. The aftermath of the HOA meeting felt like a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. On one hand, I had won, or at least it seemed that way. The board's public apology was a step in the right direction, and Karen's resignation signaled that her reign of control was over. But on the other hand, the emotional toll of the past few weeks lingered. It wasn't just about the sleepless nights or the constant anxiety. It was the realization that people could be so cruel simply because someone was different from them. That kind of prejudice doesn't disappear overnight, no matter how many apologies are issued or committees are formed. Still, life in Blue Ridge Lane began to shift in subtle ways. Some neighbors who had previously kept their distance started reaching out, offering quiet words of support. One couple invited us over for dinner, explaining that they had always found the HOA's rules suffocating but were too afraid to speak up. Another neighbor, a retired teacher named Linda, stopped by with a potted plant as a peace offering. "I'm sorry for what you've been through," she said softly. "You didn't deserve any of it." Her kindness brought tears to my eyes, not just because it was unexpected, but because it reminded me that not everyone here was complicit in the drama. But not all reactions were positive. A small faction of residents remained bitter, refusing to acknowledge that anything wrong had happened. They whispered behind closed doors, accusing me of stirring the pot or playing the victim. One man even confronted me in the parking lot of the local grocery store, his face red with anger. "You've caused enough trouble around here," he spat. "Why don't you just leave?" His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. Instead, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "This is my home too. And if you don't like it, maybe you should leave." He sputtered, clearly unprepared for me to stand my ground, and stormed off without another word. Walking away from that encounter gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in months. Each time someone tried to intimidate me, I responded with calm confidence. And it worked. Slowly but surely, the bullies began to back down. Meanwhile, the changes within the HOA started taking shape. The new Inclusivity Committee held its first meeting, inviting residents to share their thoughts and concerns. To my surprise, quite a few people showed up, not just to complain, but to offer constructive ideas. Someone suggested creating a community garden where neighbors could work together. Another proposed hosting regular potluck dinners to foster better relationships. Even Mrs. Pembroke, who had initially been resistant to change, seemed genuinely invested in making things better. She approached me after one of the meetings and apologized personally, admitting that she should have handled things differently from the start. As the weeks went by, the tension in the neighborhood began to ease. The vandalism stopped, and the nasty notes disappeared. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after such a chaotic chapter. Mark noticed the difference too. "It feels quieter now," he remarked one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, "like the storm finally passed." He was right, but I knew the calm wouldn't last forever. Change is hard, especially in places like Blue Ridge Lane, where tradition often trumps progress. There would still be moments of resistance, whispers of discontent, reminders that not everyone agreed with the new direction. But I also knew that the ball was rolling, and there was no stopping it now. One afternoon, as I lounged by the pool with a book, I caught sight of Karen packing boxes into a moving truck across the street. Our eyes met briefly before she turned away, her expression unreadable. Part of me felt a pang of sympathy. After all, no one deserves to be humiliated publicly. But another part of me couldn't help but feel satisfied. She had wielded her privilege like a weapon, using it to hurt others without consequence. Now she was leaving because she couldn't handle the scrutiny. Karma, I thought with a small smile. Later that week, I received a message from the reporter who had covered my story. She told me that the article had sparked conversations in communities nationwide, inspiring others to challenge toxic HOAs and advocate for fairness. "You've made a real impact," she wrote. "Thank you for speaking up." Reading those words filled me with pride. This journey hadn't been easy. In fact, it had been one of the hardest things I'd ever faced, but it had also been meaningful. By standing up for myself, I had shown others that they didn't have to accept mistreatment or injustice silently, and in doing so, I had reclaimed not just my dignity, but my voice. Life isn't perfect, and neither is Blue Ridge Lane. But sometimes, imperfection is exactly what makes a place feel like home. The weeks following Karen's departure brought a mix of relief and reflection. Blue Ridge Lane felt different, lighter, almost as if the oppressive cloud that had hung over the neighborhood for so long had finally lifted. But even as things improved, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about me or my swimsuit anymore. It was bigger than that. This whole ordeal had exposed cracks in the foundation of our community, cracks that ran deeper than anyone cared to admit. And while some people were eager to patch them up, others seemed content to pretend they didn't exist. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the porch sipping lemonade, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think it'll stick?" he asked. "All these changes, I mean." I hesitated before answering. The truth was, I didn't know. Change is fragile, especially when it challenges deeply ingrained habits and attitudes. Sure, the HOA had apologized, and the Inclusivity Committee was working hard to foster a more welcoming environment. But old habits die hard, and I suspected there would always be a few holdouts who resented the shift toward progress. Still, I chose to focus on the positives. "It has to," I said finally, setting my glass down on the table. "People are talking now. They're realizing that standing by silently only makes things worse. That's a start, isn't it?" Mark nodded slowly, but his eyes told me he wasn't entirely convinced. He worried, not without reason, that once the initial buzz faded, people might slip back into their old ways. After all, it's easy to champion change when everyone's watching. It's much harder to live it day in and day out. My fears weren't unfounded either. A few neighbors still gave me sideways glances when they thought I wasn't looking. One woman, who had previously been polite but distant, stopped inviting us to her annual holiday party, a subtle snub that stung more than I cared to admit. Even the vandalism, though rare now, hadn't disappeared completely. Someone egged our mailbox late one night, leaving behind a sticky mess that took hours to clean up. Each incident served as a reminder that not everyone welcomed the new direction of the neighborhood. Despite these setbacks, I refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, I threw myself into supporting the initiatives spearheaded by the Inclusivity Committee. When they announced plans to host a community picnic, I volunteered to help organize it. The idea was simple: bring neighbors together in a casual setting where they could connect without the pressure of formal meetings or agendas. We set up tables in the park, hired a local band to play soft music, and encouraged everyone to bring dishes that reflected their culture or heritage. It was meant to be a celebration of diversity, a small step toward healing the rifts that had divided us. The day of the picnic arrived bright and sunny, with a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. To my surprise, nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. Kids chased each other around the playground, laughter ringing out like wind chimes. Adults mingled over plates of food, swapping stories and recipes. For the first time in months, the atmosphere felt genuinely warm and inclusive. As I wandered through the crowd, I noticed something remarkable. The same neighbors who had once avoided me were now seeking me out. One man, who had previously dismissed my complaints as overly dramatic, approached me with an awkward smile. "Look, I owe you an apology," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't understand what you were going through before. But seeing how far you've come, well, it made me realize I should have stood up for you sooner." His words caught me off guard, but I accepted them graciously. "Thank you," I replied, meaning it. "That means a lot." By the end of the afternoon, I found myself sitting on a blanket beneath a shady tree, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Mark joined me, handing me a cup of iced tea. "Feels nice, doesn't it?" he said, gesturing toward the lively scene around us. "It does," I agreed, leaning my head against his shoulder. "But we can't get complacent. There's still work to do." He chuckled softly. "You're never satisfied, are you?" "Not when it comes to this," I admitted. "Because the moment we stop pushing forward is the moment everything slides back." And he knew I was right. While the neighborhood had taken significant strides, the journey was far from over. Building a truly inclusive and supportive community requires constant effort. It's not something you achieve overnight. But as I looked around at the smiling faces, the shared laughter, and the renewed sense of connection, I allowed myself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Blue Ridge Lane could become the kind of place where everyone felt welcome. Not because it was perfect, but because it embraced imperfection and learned to grow from it. Months passed, and the transformation in Blue Ridge Lane continued to unfold in ways I never could have imagined when this whole ordeal began. What started as a personal fight against Karen's entitled behavior had evolved into something much larger, a movement toward real change within our community. The HOA meetings, once dreaded gatherings filled with tension and judgment, became spaces for open dialogue. Neighbors who had previously been silent found their voices, sharing concerns and ideas that made the neighborhood stronger. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and sometimes progress is enough. One crisp autumn morning, I received an email from the local newspaper inviting me to speak at a town hall event about my experience. At first, I hesitated. Reliving those difficult months felt daunting, especially now that life was finally settling into a rhythm of peace. But then I remembered the messages I'd received after the initial article, notes from strangers across the country thanking me for inspiring them to stand up against similar injustices in their own communities. If telling my story again could help even one more person feel empowered, how could I say no? The night of the town hall arrived, and I stood backstage, clutching a cup of tea to steady my nerves. The auditorium buzzed with energy, packed with people eager to hear what I had to say. When I walked onto the stage, the applause caught me off guard. For a moment, all I could do was smile, overwhelmed by the warmth radiating from the crowd. As I began speaking, I realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt silenced or marginalized, and to everyone determined to create a better world. I talked about the challenges I faced, the moments of doubt and fear, but also the victories, both big and small. I spoke about the importance of standing up for yourself, not just because it's right, but because your courage might inspire others to do the same. By the time I finished, the room erupted in cheers, and several audience members approached me afterward to share their own stories. A young woman told me she had recently confronted her landlord about discriminatory practices after reading my article. An older man admitted he finally reported years of bullying by his condo association board. Their words reminded me why I had fought so hard in the first place. Back home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mark and I hosted barbecues in the backyard, welcoming neighbors old and new. Our daughter loved showing off her soccer trophies on the mantel, while I lounged by the pool, unbothered by anyone's disapproving stares. The scars of the past still lingered, but they served as reminders of how far we'd come, not just as individuals, but as a community. Karen's house sold quickly, and a young family moved in shortly after. They introduced themselves with fresh-baked cookies and an invitation to join their book club. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized the shift happening around us. People were choosing kindness over judgment, connection over division. Even Mrs. Pembroke surprised me one day by stopping by with a potted plant. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice sincere. "You've taught us all a valuable lesson." Her words stayed with me long after she left, proof that even the most resistant hearts can soften with time. As winter approached, I reflected on everything that had transpired. This journey hadn't been easy. In fact, it had tested every ounce of strength and resilience I possessed. But it had also been transformative. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about creating ripples of change that extend far beyond your immediate circle. And sometimes, those ripples grow into waves that reshape entire communities. Today, when I step outside and see kids playing freely in the cul-de-sac or neighbors chatting over fences, I feel a deep sense of pride. Blue Ridge Lane isn't perfect. It never will be. But it's ours, and that makes all the difference. Life has a way of throwing challenges at us when we least expect them, but it also gives us opportunities to rise above them, to prove that we're stronger than we think. Standing up for myself didn't just change my life. It changed the lives of countless others. And in the end, isn't that what makes a story worth telling?